New mutants are dangerous. That's why you're here.
We waited 2 years for that?
You've been through a lot.
Hey guys, it's Sean O'Connell, the managing director here at CinemaBlend, with a review of the new film, The New Mutants, a film that has been delayed constantly for so many different reasons, but is now finally making its way to select theaters around our country. I'm going to tell you guys whether it was worth the trip to the theater, but before I get into the full review, go down and hit subscribe, turn on your notifications, and that way every time we post a video here on our YouTube page, you guys can come check it out. I want to start off with something positive, because I really do love this franchise in terms of the Marvel Comics. They're one of my favorite X-Men spin-off teams. I really dig the fact that they are young mutants trying to figure out their powers for the very first time. The fact that they have to come together as a team because they're not confident enough in their own abilities. They're trained by Professor Xavier in the books, although Charles Xavier does not show up in this movie. And he's referenced a couple of different times, so you know that it's in the X-Men world. But I want to say that the cast that they picked to personify the New Mutants in their very first ever movie is actually fantastic. I want to focus on specifically Blu Hunt, who's a relative newcomer who's playing Danielle Moonstar, Dani, who is our central character and our introduction to the New Mutants team. Dani, at this point in the movie, doesn't really know her powers yet, and the way that Josh Boone, the director, is setting up the New Mutants is that they're being held in a facility that's supposed to be protecting them for their own good, but also for the good of society, because until the New Mutants figure out how to use their powers or what their powers actually are, they're told that they have to be protected.
It's important we find out your power so we can help you get better.
They kind of think together that they're being trained to eventually become X-Men, but it turns out that's not the case.
This isn't a hospital, it's a cage.
Dani is our window into this universe, and Blu Hunt's great. I really liked her a lot. She's very vulnerable. She's an excellent protagonist for us to sort of sympathize with because she's really confused by her powers. She doesn't know necessarily what's going on in this facility.
What is this place?
And she doesn't know who on the New Mutants team, though they're not a team, who she can trust. And she's kind of forms a bond with Rain, who's played by Maisie Williams from Game of Thrones. She has a sort of antagonistic relationship with Anya Taylor-Joy, who plays Illyana. And I just thought that Blu Hunt did an excellent job of portraying Dani and giving us a really good window into who these characters are. On the flip side, Anya Taylor-Joy steals the show as Illyana. She is a fantastic representation of Magique, who is a supernatural, almost magic-infused character. She's the sister of Colossus, who you know from the X-Men team.
It's not boyband. Sure it's not.
She has the ability to transport herself into a magical realm called Limbo, which we get to see often. She has an outstanding weapon called the Soul Sword, and that looks really great when it's realized on screen. And she just has that sort of aloof, grungy 90s, standoffish attitude that fits the aesthetic and the mood of the film really, really well. The movie thinks that it has like a punk rock spirit to it, and if it really committed to that, it might have been a really cool movie, but it doesn't really commit to much of anything. Although Anya Taylor-Joy really does know that she's playing the badass of the team, and she leans heavily into that role.
That was so hot.
The cast is so good, the movie never lives up to their potential. And the problem is just the movie is hopelessly generic. If it's meant to be a horror film, it's never actually scary. If it's meant to be a superhero movie, even an origin story for superhero films, it never gets very exciting. There are threats, but they're really small scale. Alice Braga is playing the main therapist who's looking out for the New Mutants, or sort of shepherding them underneath the realm of this facility, and she is supposed to be menacing, but never really comes off that way.
Ooh, scary.
There is the overarching threat of the Demon Bear, who's a significant character from the comics, and even when that special effect shows up, it's never really terrifying. There are times when, if you know Dani's power, Danielle Moonstar is able to sort of make you manifest and see your worst nightmares and fears come true, and the movie tries to sprinkle that into what the New Mutants fear the most. But those things are like super watered down PG versions of like horror rated things, and the movie never commits to any of them. So I just kind of felt like every time it looked like it was going to take a big swing at something exciting and new and different, it doesn't. It really just sort of reverts to things we've seen before.
I don't think we're here to get better.
And that's really frustrating because the comic book adaptation genre has evolved so far beyond what you were given in New Mutants. I'm trying to view the movie as when you were coming out in 2017, you were going to be the launch of the X-Men New Mutants spin-off franchise. And if this is your first step, it's kind of just a flat stumble, and that's disappointing. So the word that I keep landing on when I think about New Mutants is it's a relic. And I don't want to judge it based fully on what happened to it, but it's kind of impossible to talk about the movie without understanding its bigger role in the entire comic book world. It was left at the side of the road when Disney and Fox completed their merger, because the Mutants, the X-Men universe, is now going to shift over to the MCU. But the New Mutants movie was finished and needed a place to get released. It would have been fine if Disney kind of just put it on the shelf and said, we don't ever want to show this. Because it has a time capsule quality to it. Like, you see Maisie Williams and you're like, oh yeah, this is when she was in the throes of being in Game of Thrones. Anya Taylor-Joy was building off of the success of working with M. Night Shyamalan and showing up in Split. Charlie Heaton, who plays Cannonball, was making a name for himself on Stranger Things. But all those things happened a couple of years ago, and by now they're not huge movie stars anymore. So the movie just has this outdated feel to it. Every time that they are in the common area of this facility, the place where they're just supposed to hang out and talk, for whatever reason, Josh Boone puts Buffy the Vampire Slayer on the television as a reference point, and Buffy hasn't been a popular television show for years. So, like, you keep seeing these moments where you're just like, that feels really dated, that feels really dated. But then in a big picture thing, this just feels like the kind of superhero movie that we were getting back in the early 1990s, when they hadn't quite figured out how to evolve the characters, when the special effects looked okay by comic book standards, but still not really up to snuff with what we're used to seeing. Like, now we have a CGI Thanos character.
I am inevitable.
You can do anything in the world of comic book superheroes. I'm not saying New Mutants is like a reversal, but it's a few steps backwards, even just by X-Men standards. It'll never be the worst film in the X-Men franchise, because X-Men 3, The Last Stand, will always exist, and that's just a disaster. This movie isn't horrible, but it's not good, and it's just disappointing. Disappointing is really the only way that I can kind of sum it up. All right, time for a star rating. I'm giving the New Mutants 1.5 stars out of 5, and you could kind of see this coming. Disney's putting a bunch of their films on Disney Plus, whether it be the one and only Ivan or Mulan, and they didn't want to do that with this one. The studio often screens things in advance for press, but we had to go out to the theaters in order to go see this, and I think that they were just kind of hiding it, which is fine. I mean, studios do that every once in a while, but I still had hope, and I just left it feeling sad. So I'm giving it 1.5 stars out of 5. The X-Men franchise sort of ends with a whimper instead of a bang, and now we're left to see what Kevin Feige is going to do with the mutants in the MCU, likely in several years from now. So keep it here so that we can talk about those developments as they happen. To make sure that you don't miss any video that we put on CinemaBlend's YouTube page, make sure that you hit subscribe and turn on your notifications, and that way you'll get a notice every single time we put a new video on the YouTube page.